My son sat through the will reading with a smug, almost triumphant grin, clearly convinced that I would walk away with nothing from his mother's $34 million estate. He looked relaxed, certain the outcome was already decided. But the moment the attorney read one carefully worded sentence, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. The confidence drained out of my son's face in an instant. Logan exploded into a rage, shouting so violently that his voice seemed to rattle the walls of the office itself. That memory collided sharply with the present as a ceramic coffee mug slipped from my hand and smashed against the kitchen's vinyl floor. Brown liquid splattered outward as my neighbor's voice rose through the thin wall separating our apartments. "Your stupid sprinkler system is drowning my petunias again, Carl." I reached for a dish towel and lowered myself to the floor, carefully gathering the broken pieces. I was 65 years old, and somehow I was still cleaning up problems that were only partially my responsibility. The automatic sprinkler system I had installed a few weeks earlier had one faulty connector. Every few days, it sent a steady stream of water over the fence line and into my neighbor's flower bed. I had tried more than once to explain the repair timeline to her, but patience had never been Marjorie Collins's strongest trait. The telephone started ringing. I ignored it at first, concentrating on blotting up the coffee spreading across the floor. The answering machine could handle it, but the ringing did not stop. It cut through Marjorie's continued ranting about ruined landscaping and declining property values. By the fifth ring, I gave up. I stood, dropped the soaked towel into the sink, and picked up the receiver. "This is Carl Ramirez." "Mr. Ramirez, my name is Paula Whitman. I am calling from Whitman, Crowley, and Finch in Fort Collins." Her voice was measured and professional, the kind of careful tone I had come to associate with unpleasant news. My chest tightened before she said anything else. "I am calling in regard to Melissa Ann Ramirez." My grip on the phone tightened immediately. No one had used Melissa's full name around me in more than 15 years. "What about her?" I asked. "Sir, I regret to inform you that Mrs. Ramirez passed away Tuesday evening. The funeral service is scheduled for this Friday at 2 o'clock at Evergreen Memorial Chapel." The words landed like a physical blow. I sank heavily into the kitchen chair, its familiar creak sounding painfully loud in the sudden silence. Tuesday evening. 3 days ago. 3 days I had spent worrying about sprinkler fittings and spilled coffee. "Mr. Ramirez, are you still on the line?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said after a pause. "I am here." My voice sounded distant, almost unfamiliar to my own ears. "How did you get my phone number?" "Your name was listed among Mrs. Ramirez's personal records as an emergency contact. I understand the two of you were previously married?" "Previously married." 22 years reduced to a sterile legal phrase. "Yes, we divorced in 2011. I replied automatically, the words flowing from years of filling out forms and paperwork. "I understand. There will be a reading of the will following the service. You are named as a beneficiary, and your attendance would be appropriate." Beneficiary. The word felt unreal. Impossible. Melissa had built her fortune after our divorce, turning the modest consulting firm she started while we were married into a powerhouse I only recognized from business articles and financial magazines. I could not imagine why she would leave me anything at all. "Mr. Ramirez," she asked, "do you plan to attend?" Through the kitchen window, I could see Marjorie Collins standing over her soaked flower bed, hands planted firmly on her hips, already preparing for another argument. Under normal circumstances, I would have braced myself for it. But at that moment, her complaints felt distant and insignificant, like noise from another life. "The chapel?" I said slowly. "Which one did you say?" "Evergreen Memorial on Oak Street. The service begins at 2 o'clock, followed by a brief gathering. The will reading is scheduled for 4:30 at our downtown office." I nodded, even though she could not see me. "Yes, I will be there." After the call ended, I stayed seated, staring at the phone as though it might ring again and somehow undo what I had just heard. The coffee stains on the floor were already darkening into stubborn rings that would require scrubbing later. I did not move. I could not. The reality had not settled yet. Melissa was gone. Brilliant, stubborn, impossible. Melissa was no longer in the world. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, catching tiny dust particles in the air. They drifted slowly, like fragments of memories I had spent years trying to bury. Her name echoed in my thoughts, each syllable pulling me backward through time, until suddenly I was no longer in my kitchen. I was standing inside Harper's Diner on a snowy evening in January of 1989. I remembered watching a woman in a crimson wool coat standing near the counter, arguing with the manager in a nearly empty restaurant. "So you are telling me you will not even consider a woman for weekend manager because you think we cannot handle stress?" she said sharply. That might be the most ridiculous thing I have heard all week. I had frozen mid-bite, my fork hovering halfway between the plate and my mouth. She turned slightly as she spoke, and I caught her profile. Strong cheekbones, a determined jaw, dark hair reflecting the harsh overhead lights. She was breathtaking in her anger. I remember hoping the manager would keep arguing, just so I could keep listening to her dismantle him piece by piece. "Ma'am, I did not intend any offense," he said weakly. "Of course you did not intend offense," she replied without missing a beat. "You did not accidentally offend anyone," she shot back. "You deliberately chose discrimination." She reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the counter toward him. "When you finally decide to hire based on qualifications instead of outdated stereotypes, you can contact me." The bell above the door rang as she walked out, and the diner immediately felt smaller, like all the energy had been sucked out of the room. I watched through the front window as she climbed into a blue compact sedan. Before pulling into traffic, she checked her mirrors twice, careful and precise, yet clearly unafraid to stand her ground when something mattered. "That woman is nothing but trouble," the manager muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood up abruptly, leaving a $5 bill beside my unfinished slice of pie. My voice surprised even me when I spoke. "No," I said firmly. "She is not trouble. She is remarkable." The business card still lay on the counter, forgotten. I picked it up and read it carefully. Melissa Grant, business consultant. I memorized the phone number before stepping back out into the cold winter air. It took me 3 full days to gather the nerve to call her. When I finally did, she answered on the second ring with a crisp, professional greeting. "Melissa Grant. My name is Carl Ramirez. We have not officially met, but I saw you at Harper's Diner last Friday night." There was a brief pause on the line. "You mean the man with the pie who corrected the manager?" she asked. "The one who defended me?" "You heard that?" I asked, fumbling with my gloves as I stood beside my car. "I did," she replied, amusement clear in her voice. "You also left a generous tip." I could practically hear her smiling. "So, Carl Ramirez," she continued, "what can I do for you?" "I would like to take you to dinner," I said. "Someplace better than that diner." Another pause followed. Longer this time. "Are you asking me out?" she asked. "Or are you trying to hire a consultant?" "Definitely a date," I said. "Although, if you happen to offer advice on convincing intelligent, beautiful women to have dinner with complete strangers, I would gladly pay for the consultation." She laughed. Not a polite courtesy laugh, but a real one, warm and unguarded. "Saturday night," she said. "Antonio's on Pine Street, 7 o'clock. She wore the same red coat to dinner, but underneath it was a simple black dress that made my heart race the moment I saw her. We talked for 3 straight hours and somehow avoided discussing work entirely. She told me about growing up in Northern California. I told her about my job at the regional power station. We bonded over classic films, new novels, and the strange comfort of quiet routines. When she laughed at my story about accidentally flooding my apartment while trying to fix a leaky pipe, I knew something inside me had shifted permanently. 6 months later, I proposed to her in that same diner. I slid a ring across the same counter where she had once left her business card. "Marry me, Melissa Grant," I said. "Make me the luckiest man in Colorado." She said yes before I could finish the sentence. Our wedding day was drenched in bright September sunlight, the kind of flawless weather that makes lifelong promises feel attainable. Melissa wore her grandmother's dress, tailored carefully to fit her frame, and carried a bundle of wildflowers we had picked together that morning. My hand trembled as I placed the ring on her finger. "Forever," she whispered. I believed her without hesitation. Our son Logan was born 2 years later, red-faced and furious at the world. A miracle that turned our quiet home into something filled with purpose. I remember standing in the hospital room, watching Melissa hold him with the same fierce intensity she brought to everything she did, and thinking that nothing else in life could possibly matter more than that moment. Even then, though, I noticed her gaze occasionally drifting to a business magazine someone had left on the bedside table. As Logan grew from a toddler into a school-aged child, I began to see changes I had overlooked in those early, happy years. When he turned 7, Melissa bought him a computer. Not a toy, but a full professional machine that cost more than I earned in a month. "He needs to understand technology," she said as she watched him navigate programs I had never heard of. "The future belongs to children who think digitally." I had suggested teaching him how to fish instead. She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. By then, we had moved to a large house on Brookside Drive. It had 3 bathrooms and a kitchen island larger than our entire old apartment kitchen. Melissa's consulting firm had secured a lucrative contract with an energy conglomerate, and suddenly we had money for things I had never imagined wanting. A housekeeper came twice a week. The refrigerator dispensed ice through the door. Logan's bedroom looked like a showroom. "Is this not incredible?" Melissa asked one evening, gesturing around the formal dining room with its crystal chandelier and long table that seated 12. "We can finally host people properly." I missed our old kitchen table, worn smooth from years of coloring books and late-night conversations. This new table gleamed like glass, showing every smudge and fingerprint, demanding placemats and coasters. The entertaining began almost immediately. Business partners, potential investors, and polished couples whose conversations revolved around market positions and investment portfolios. I wore my best shirt and tried to keep up, but discussions of hedge funds and corporate restructuring made me feel like I was struggling through a language I barely understood. "Carl works at the power station," Melissa would say whenever someone asked about me, and for the first time, I heard something in her tone that had not been there before. It was not pride. It was apology, as though my job required justification. Logan flourished in that new environment as if he had been built for it. By the time he was 10, he could hold intelligent conversations about software and coding with Melissa's technology-focused clients. At 12, he was offering opinions on wine selections at upscale restaurants I could not have afforded on my own salary. By 14, he rolled his eyes whenever I mentioned simple family camping trips, choosing instead to accompany Melissa to business conferences in cities like Boulder and Santa Fe. "Dad does not get it," became his favorite line, usually delivered with a heavy sigh, the kind that suggested he felt burdened by my outdated thinking. The first serious fight between Melissa and me came on Logan's 15th birthday. She had planned a celebration that felt less like a teenager's party and more like a corporate networking reception. Professional catering, hired entertainers, a guest list filled with business associates and their equally polished children. I had imagined something entirely different. Maybe a backyard barbecue with his school friends and paper plates. "This is humiliating," I told her the night before the party, as I watched hired staff arrange elaborate floral displays throughout the house. "He is 15, not 50. He is growing up in a world that does not resemble the one we grew up in," Melissa replied calmly, adjusting a centerpiece with the same focus she used during contract negotiations. "These connections matter. These relationships will shape his future." "And what about letting him just be a kid?" I asked. She turned to face me fully, and for the first time in years, I saw something unsettling in her expression. Where warmth used to live, there was calculation instead. Being just a kid is a luxury we cannot afford, she said evenly. The world is competitive. Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose. Her words sent me back to my own 15th birthday. A quiet day fishing with my father. A homemade cake. Gifts wrapped in newspaper comics. Nothing fancy, nothing strategic. And yet, it had been perfect. By Melissa's standards, the party was a triumph. Logan impressed the adults, exchanged contact information with their children, and received gifts that spoke of serious wealth. High-end laptops, designer clothes, and a mountain bike worth more than some used cars. But at one point, I spotted him standing alone near the pool, his face distant, disconnected from the polished spectacle surrounding him. "You doing all right, kid?" I asked gently. He straightened immediately, slipping back into the confident persona his mother had carefully shaped. "Of course," he said quickly. "Why would I not be?" Still, for a brief second, I had seen the confused boy beneath all that forced sophistication, and the sight left a knot in my chest. That night marked the beginning of the end, though I did not recognize it at the time. What followed were 10 years of slow-motion collapse, like watching a landslide from the bottom of a mountain. You can see it coming. You know it will destroy everything in its path, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. Melissa's business consumed more and more of her life. Weekend family dinners were replaced by conference calls. Planned vacations disappeared because of sudden client emergencies. Logan's school events competed with board meetings, and the board meetings always won. "You do not understand the pressure I am under," she would say whenever I protested missing yet another baseball game or school event. "This company supports our lifestyle. Someone has to make the difficult choices." But I did understand pressure. I lived with it every day at the power station, making sure the grid stayed stable, making sure thousands of homes had electricity when they flipped a switch. The difference was that my pressure served something beyond my own ambition. By the time Logan graduated from high school, he felt like a stranger living in my house. Melissa had molded him into her ideal successor. He was sharp, driven, and dismissive of anything that did not directly advance his future. When I cautiously suggested he consider a trade program alongside his college applications, he looked at me as if I had insulted him. "Dad, that kind of thinking is exactly why you are stuck where you are," he said. He was 17 and already spoke like a corporate strategist. "You settled for mediocrity. I will not make that mistake." The words landed like blows to the chest. Settled for mediocrity. As if decades of keeping the lights on for an entire community meant nothing. As if showing up, being present, and doing honest work were somehow embarrassing. College only deepened the divide. Logan chose a business school, the same one Melissa had attended, which surprised no one. When he came home for holidays, he arrived armed with theories about efficiency, markets, and personal optimization. He looked at our house, our routines, and our values with thinly veiled disdain. "You could have done more, Dad," he would say, as though my contentment were a moral failure. "Mom started with nothing and built an empire. You have had the same job for over 20 years. "Some things matter more than money," I would respond. But by then, he was no longer listening. The final rupture came during his senior year. Melissa had been working nearly non-stop on a massive acquisition deal, logging 100-hour weeks. I handled everything at home: shopping, cleaning, the small, unglamorous tasks that kept life functioning. When she missed Logan's graduation ceremony because of a client emergency, something inside me finally broke. "This has gone far enough," I said that night. "Family has to come first sometimes." She stood in our kitchen, surrounded by granite countertops and crystal fixtures, still dressed in her tailored business suit well past midnight, her attention fixed on the glowing screen of her phone as new emails continued to arrive. "Do not you dare lecture me about priorities," Melissa snapped. Everything we have, everything Logan has accomplished, exists because of my work. And what about everything we have lost? I asked quietly. Lost what? She said, finally lifting her eyes from her phone. She genuinely looked confused. Us, I said, being a family instead of a corporate operation. She studied me in silence for several long seconds. I did not need her to answer out loud. I saw the truth settle behind her eyes before she spoke. We were no longer a family. We were a partnership that had run past its expiration date. Maybe it is time we stop pretending this still works, she said softly. The divorce took 6 months. Melissa's attorneys were ruthless in the most polished way possible. Efficient, courteous, absolutely devastating. I was awarded the small house on Linden Drive, our original starter home that she had kept as a rental investment, along with enough money to live simply and without fear. She kept everything else, including Logan. You are holding him back, Logan told me during one of our final conversations, just before he moved to Denver to take a position at Melissa's firm. This obsession with family values and simple living is toxic, Dad. I cannot live with that negativity anymore. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet house, surrounded by boxes filled with memories from a life that apparently no longer mattered to the people I loved most. Now, 15 years later, the afternoon light outside my apartment window was beginning to fade. My coffee had gone cold. Broken ceramic pieces still littered the floor. Somewhere across town, preparations were underway for the funeral of the woman who once promised me forever, and I still did not understand why she had remembered my name in her will. The days between Paula Whitman's call and the funeral passed in a strange, emotional suspension. I cleaned my apartment twice. I pressed the one suit I owned that still fit. I rehearsed conversations that would never take place. Every morning I considered staying home. Every evening I found myself committed to going, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Friday arrived gray and damp, typical late spring weather in northern Colorado. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I had not worn in 5 years, wondering what Melissa would think if she saw the man I had become. The reflection showed someone older than I felt. Gray hair where brown once lived. Lines etched by years of quiet disappointment and restraint. The drive to Evergreen Memorial Chapel took about 20 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that told the story of Fort Collins's economic divide. My modest apartment complex gave way to tidy middle-class streets, then to expansive homes with manicured lawns and stone facades. These were the neighborhoods Melissa's world occupied. The chapel sat on a low rise overlooking the city, its Gothic stone exterior projecting permanence, success, and money. Luxury vehicles filled the circular drive. Mercedes sedans, BMW sport utilities, a few sleek electric cars that likely cost more than I earned in my best year. I parked my aging Honda between a Lexus and a Cadillac and stepped out, feeling like an uninvited guest at a private event. Inside, the chapel whispered wealth, polished wood pews, stained glass filtering muted light, floral arrangements positioned with deliberate artistry. At least 200 people filled the space, their low conversations blending respectful mourning with quiet professional networking. I recognized a handful of faces from business dinners Melissa once insisted I attend. Most, however, belonged to the life she built long after I was gone. I slid into a back pew, hoping to disappear until the service ended. That hope vanished immediately. Whispers followed me like ripples across still water. A woman in an impeccably tailored black suit leaned toward her companion and gestured subtly in my direction. I caught fragments as they traveled. That is her ex-husband. I cannot believe he showed up, after everything he did to her. The story had evolved without me. In this version, I was the villain, the anchor who nearly sank a brilliant woman. I had learned long ago not to fight narratives that made other people comfortable. Dad? The word cut through the chapel like a blade. I looked up to see Logan striding down the aisle toward me. His expression was tight with disbelief and barely restrained anger. At 37, He carried Melissa's sharp features and commanding presence. His suit was flawless, his watch unmistakably expensive. Confidence radiated from him effortlessly. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the chapel. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. I stood slowly and met his gaze. "I came to pay my respects." "You lost that right 15 years ago," he said, stepping closer. I caught the sharp scent of his cologne, something aggressive and expensive. "She would not want you here." "Maybe not," I said evenly. "But I needed to be." "For what?" he snapped. "To soothe your conscience? To pretend you are the grieving husband in front of people who know exactly what kind of man you were?" The chapel fell completely silent. Nearly 200 sets of eyes locked onto us, watching the confrontation unfold the way spectators watch a public spectacle. I felt the familiar weight of judgment pressed down on me, the same suffocating pressure I had lived under during the final years of my marriage. But this time, something inside me had shifted. This time, I had nothing left to protect. "I am not here to cause problems, Logan," I said steadily. "I will sit in the back. I will not speak to anyone. When the service ends, I will leave quietly." "No," he snapped. "You will leave now." His voice climbed higher, and I heard murmurs ripple through the crowd, a low hum of approval. He fed off it. "You embarrassed her enough while she was alive," he continued. "Do not make it worse by pretending you have the right to mourn her." I stayed on my feet, meeting his stare without flinching. The chapel seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Someone cleared their throat. A phone buzzed softly against polished wood. Before I could respond, Logan turned away from me and addressed the room. His voice shifted instantly, smooth and commanding, the tone of someone used to controlling an audience. "I apologize for this interruption during what should be a respectful moment of remembrance," he said. Then he gestured toward me with a flick of his hand, as if dismissing an inconvenience. "My father appears to have forgotten that divorce means you are no longer family." A few heads nodded. Someone murmured agreement. I felt heat rise to my face, but I forced myself to stay calm. "For those of you who may not recognize him," Logan continued, growing more confident, "this is Carl Ramirez, the man who spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this city has ever known. While my mother was building a company that employed hundreds of people, he was satisfied clocking in and out and criticizing her ambition." "Logan, stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why?" he shot back. "I think everyone here deserves to know why you are really standing in this room." He turned fully to the crowd, like a prosecutor addressing a jury. "He took half of her assets in the divorce, despite contributing nothing to her success," Logan said. "Then he spent 15 years playing the victim while she built something extraordinary." The audience was fully engaged now. I saw familiar faces, former neighbors, people I once considered friends. Not one of them met my eyes. "She supported him for years while he refused to grow," Logan continued. "Refused to take risks, refused to become the partner she deserved, and now that she is gone, he shows up expecting sympathy, expecting to be treated like he mattered in her life." Each sentence struck hard, not because every word was false, but because they flattened more than 2 decades of marriage into a simple story of failure and blame. I considered defending myself, explaining the love we once shared, the sacrifices, the slow drift apart. But it was pointless. These people had already chosen the version that made sense to them. "My mother died building something that will outlast all of us," Logan concluded, his voice swelling with conviction. "She deserved a husband who would help her rise, not one who tried to pull her down to his level." The chapel fell into absolute silence. I stood there, exposed, absorbing the weight of nearly 200 judgmental stares. A part of me wanted to walk out, to escape the humiliation. But another part, the part that had loved Melissa Grant more deeply than anything else in my life, refused to be chased away from saying goodbye. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Logan blinked, clearly startled. He had expected me to break, to retreat. When I did not, his confidence wavered, just briefly. I loved your mother for 40 years, I said, my voice steady and clear in the stillness. 22 of those years as her husband. 18 more as someone who wished her well, even after everything that went wrong between us. I am not here to make claims. I am not here to demand recognition. I am here because we once made promises to each other, and those promises mattered to me. I sat back down and folded my hands in my lap. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Logan stood frozen in the aisle, clearly unprepared for resistance to his public condemnation. "The service will begin in 5 minutes," a voice announced from the front. The funeral director was likely trying to restore order to the carefully planned proceedings. Logan shot me one last look filled with contempt, then turned and walked toward the front pew reserved for family. As quiet conversations resumed around me, I caught fragments drifting through the air. The nerve of some people. Poor Logan, having to deal with that. He should have stayed home. I stayed. I remained seated through the eulogy that painted Melissa as a visionary who overcame obstacles to achieve greatness. I listened to business associates praise her leadership and innovation. I endured the carefully chosen music that emphasized triumph and legacy. When it was over, people filed past the front, offering condolences to Logan while deliberately avoiding me. I waited until the chapel had nearly emptied before standing to leave. "Mr. Ramirez? Mr. Ramirez?" A man in an impeccably tailored suit approached me, carrying a leather briefcase that looked as expensive as everything else about him. He was middle-aged, polished, and unmistakably professional. "My name is Daniel Morrison, from Morrison, Welsh and Associates. May I have a moment of your time?" As the final hymn faded and the funeral director stepped forward to deliver closing remarks, a familiar exhaustion settled over me like a heavy coat. The worst of the day was almost finished. In just a few minutes, I could slip out through a side exit, drive back to my quiet apartment, and try to erase this entire humiliating ordeal from my mind. Around us, people began gathering purses and folded programs. That subtle, restless movement that signals a formal event is ending. Logan stood near the front pews, accepting condolences with the practiced ease of someone who had grown comfortable being the center of attention. A few mourners glanced in my direction, but most had already written me off as irrelevant. I was reaching for my jacket when the voice stopped me. "Mr. Ramirez." Daniel Morrison stepped closer, his suit still flawless despite the long ceremony. Up close, he looked younger than I had expected, maybe around 50, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the calm confidence of someone accustomed to managing the affairs of very wealthy people. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, extending his hand. "We spoke briefly earlier." Daniel Morrison. "Thank you," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "The service was well done. Melissa would have appreciated it. She was very specific about her final wishes," he said. Then he glanced around the steadily emptying chapel. "I was hoping to speak with you and Logan together. There are some matters we need to address regarding Mrs. Ramirez's estate." Before I could respond, Logan appeared at my side. His expression shifted instantly from composed grief to alert interest. "Daniel," he said, nodding. "I was wondering when we would move on to the business side of things." "Of course," Daniel replied evenly. "These matters require careful handling. I would like both of you to come to my office for the formal reading of your mother's will." "Both of us?" Logan's eyebrows rose. "Is that really necessary? I mean, he is not exactly—" He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Your father is specifically named in the will, Logan," Daniel said calmly. "His presence is legally required." I felt a brief flicker of surprise. "Named in the will," I repeated. That seemed unlikely given everything that had happened between Melissa and me. More likely, it was some minor technical mention, perhaps a formal acknowledgement or clarification that I had no claim. "I do not think that is necessary," I said quietly. "I am sure it is just a formality. You do not need me there." Daniel met my eyes directly. "I am afraid I do, Mr. Ramirez," he said. Mrs. Ramirez was very explicit about who must be present for the reading. Both you and Logan. Something in his tone made it clear this was not open for discussion. Logan looked irritated, but he shrugged with the easy confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already guaranteed. Fine, he said. Let us get it over with. He turned to me, impatience barely concealed. Try not to complicate this. The walk to Daniel's office took us several blocks through downtown Fort Collins, past buildings that reflected the city's long relationship with energy, industry, and money. Daniel filled the silence with neutral conversation about the weather and the turnout at the service, careful remarks that revealed absolutely nothing about what awaited us. His office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian home. Inside, everything spoke of established success. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound volumes lining the shelves, framed diplomas and certifications interrupted by photographs of Daniel standing beside local officials and business leaders. It was exactly the kind of place Melissa would have respected. Prestigious without being flashy, powerful without appearing vulgar. Please have a seat, Daniel said, gesturing toward two leather chairs positioned across from his mahogany desk. Logan immediately took the chair closest to him. I sat in the one slightly off to the side, which felt appropriate given my marginal role in all of this. Daniel settled behind the desk and opened a thick folder, removing several documents with the careful precision of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles that floated quietly in the air. Before we begin, Daniel said, adjusting his glasses, I want to offer my condolences again. Melissa Ramirez was not only a valued client, but someone I considered a friend. Her passing has left a significant void. Logan nodded solemnly. I remained quiet, unsure what expression was expected from a man whose relationship with the deceased was layered with history and regret. Daniel lifted the top document, several pages bound neatly with a blue backing, and cleared his throat. This is the last will and testament of Melissa Ann Ramirez, he said, executed on March 15, 2024, and properly witnessed in accordance with Colorado state law. The will supersedes all prior wills and codicils. Only 14 months ago. The timing caught my attention immediately. I wondered what had driven Melissa to revise her will so recently. Had she been ill? Had something happened that forced her to confront her own mortality in a way she never had before? The will further affirms that Mrs. Ramirez was of sound mind and full disposing memory at the time these documents were executed, Daniel continued, his voice steady and formal. It also confirms that she acted freely, without undue influence or coercion. His tone carried the unmistakable rhythm of legal proceedings, every word deliberate and carefully articulated. Logan leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together tightly. I recognized that posture. It was the stance of a man preparing to step into what he believed was rightfully his, a man ready to claim the empire his mother had spent her life building. Daniel turned the page, the lenses of his glasses catching the slanted afternoon light as he continued reading in the same calm, professional cadence. I hereby make the following specific bequests and devises, he read. To my beloved son, Logan Michael Ramirez, I leave the family residence located at 847 Brookside Drive, together with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein. A pleased smile spread across Logan's face. The Brookside house was worth at least $800,000, a sprawling property with mountain views, designed for hosting clients and projecting success. Additionally, Daniel continued, I bequeath to my son the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of the completion of probate. $500,000 plus the house. I watched Logan closely. He was satisfied, no question about that, but I noticed a subtle hesitation behind his smile, a flicker of calculation. $500,000 was a considerable sum, but it was nowhere near the full value of Melissa's business empire. Where was the rest? That is wonderful, of course, Logan said carefully, his voice betraying just a hint of uncertainty. But what about my mother's business interests? The company? Daniel placed the page down and lifted the next one, his expression remaining neutral. I am proceeding in the order the will specifies, he said evenly. Please allow me to finish reading the relevant sections. I shifted slightly in my chair, increasingly aware that I was witnessing something intensely private. $500,000 alone was more money than I would ever see in my lifetime. Combined with the house, Logan's inheritance was already substantial. It made sense. He was her son, her protégé, the person she had shaped to understand her world. The bequest to Logan, Daniel continued, is subject to the following conditions. The inheritance is contingent upon his continued employment with Ramirez Consulting Group for a minimum of 2 years following the execution of this will, or until such time as the company is sold or formally dissolved. Logan's expression changed instantly. Conditions? He said. What conditions? And what do you mean until the company is sold? Who would sell it? I am reading the will exactly as written, Daniel replied calmly. These are your mother's words. A tension I had not noticed before crept into the room. Logan's confident posture shifted. His hands loosened, then clenched again in his lap. Despite myself, I leaned forward slightly, pulled into the moment. Let me be clear, Logan said, his voice sharpening in a way I recognized all too well. I get the house and the money, but there are strings attached, and you are talking about selling the company? That does not make sense. My mother would never sell it. That company was her life's work. Daniel removed his glasses and wiped them carefully with a cloth, a deliberate pause that seemed designed to give us both time to absorb what was unfolding. When he put them back on, his gaze moved between Logan and me with an expression I could not quite interpret. Your mother's will includes additional provisions concerning the disposition of her remaining assets, he said quietly. That includes the company, her investment portfolio, and several other significant holdings. Then let us hear them, Logan said sharply, his patience clearly thinning. What are these provisions? I felt a growing sense of unease settle in my chest. Something about Daniel's demeanor told me we were approaching a revelation none of us were prepared for. The careful pacing of his words, the faint note of reluctance creeping into his voice, reminded me of how doctors speak when delivering news they know will change everything. Before I proceed, Daniel said, leaning back in his chair, I want to be absolutely clear about one thing. These documents reflect Mrs. Ramirez's final, fully considered wishes. They were prepared after extensive discussion and consultation, and she was unwavering about their contents. The office fell completely silent, broken only by the steady ticking of an antique clock on Daniel's bookshelf. Logan stared at him with growing alarm, while I found myself wondering why Melissa had insisted that I be present for what I had assumed would be a routine family formality. Daniel lifted the third page of the will. His eyes scanned the text briefly before he looked up at both of us. However, he said, and the weight in his voice made my stomach tighten, there are additional provisions that significantly alter the distribution of Mrs. Ramirez's estate. For the first time since we had entered his office, Daniel removed his gaze from the document and looked directly at me. Something in his expression unsettled me. It was a careful mix of sympathy and professional duty, the kind of look reserved for moments people are never ready for. However, he repeated deliberately, the will contains provisions governing the disposition of Mrs. Ramirez's remaining assets, which constitute the majority of her estate. Logan leaned forward even more, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Then let us hear it, he said tensely. The company, the investments, all of it. Daniel returned his attention to the page and cleared his throat, pausing in a way that suggested he was about to detonate something irreversible. To my former husband, Carl Michael Ramirez, he read aloud. The words landed in the quiet office like stones dropped into still water. I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. For a moment, I could not breathe. My mouth fell open before I could stop it. $33.5 million. The number was so absurdly large, it did not feel connected to reality. Certainly not to a man sitting in a lawyer's office in Fort Collins who worried about rent increases and grocery prices. "There has to be a mistake," I said finally. My voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. "Did you say 33 million? $33.5 million, Daniel confirmed calmly. His tone did not carry surprise. Instead, there was a watchfulness in his eyes, as though he was observing a reaction he had anticipated. Logan's face drained of color, then flushed deep red, as if his body could not decide how to respond. "What did you just say?" he demanded. Daniel continued, unmoved. "Additionally," he read, "I hereby transfer to Carl Ramirez a controlling interest in Ramirez Consulting Group, including all subsidiary entities, real estate holdings, and associated business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities and appointment as chairman of the board of directors." The room seemed to tilt. I felt dizzy, as though gravity itself had shifted. Controlling interest. Melissa's company. The empire I had watched her build from nothing. The business that had slowly swallowed our marriage and become the source of my own quiet inadequacy. She was giving it to me. "This cannot be right," I whispered. "There has to be an error somewhere." "I assure you, Mr. Ramirez, there is no error," Daniel said. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with methodical care. "These documents were prepared under Mrs. Ramirez's direct supervision. She reviewed every clause multiple times and personally confirmed that they reflected her exact wishes." Logan sprang to his feet so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and struck the wall. "This is impossible," he said. "She would not do this. She could not." He turned toward me, his expression a volatile mix of disbelief and something far darker. "What did you do?" he demanded. "How did you manipulate her?" "I did nothing," I said weakly. My mind was still struggling to keep up with reality. "I have not spoken to your mother in 15 years. "Bullshit," Logan snapped. The word cracked through the room like a gunshot. "People do not give $33 million to their ex-husbands for no reason. You must have gotten to her. Convinced her when she was sick, when she was not thinking clearly." Daniel's voice cut cleanly through Logan's rising hysteria. "I can state unequivocally that Mrs. Ramirez was of sound mind when these documents were executed," he said firmly. "She underwent a comprehensive mental competency evaluation specifically to prevent any future challenges to the validity of her will." I remained frozen in my chair, watching the scene as if it were unfolding to someone else. $33.5 million. Control of a multi-million-dollar corporation. These were numbers and concepts that belonged to a world entirely separate from mine. "But why?" I asked quietly. The question rose from a place of genuine confusion. Why would she do this? Daniel gathered the documents into a precise stack, his movements careful and deliberate. "Mrs. Ramirez anticipated that question," he said. "She left explicit instructions for me to deliver a personal message to you after these provisions were read." Logan's face twisted with raw rage and disbelief. "A personal message?" he shouted. "She left him a personal message, but cut me out of everything that actually matters?" "You received a significant inheritance, Logan," Daniel replied evenly. $500,000 and a valuable property represent more wealth than most people will ever see. Compared to what he is getting, Logan snapped, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "That is nothing. You are talking about hundreds of millions in total assets. The company alone is worth more than everything else combined." The air in the room felt electric, thick enough to taste. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I understood that my entire life had just been irrevocably altered. Nothing would ever be the same again. But all I could focus on was the impossible truth staring me in the face. Melissa, driven, relentless Melissa, the woman who had come to resent everything I symbolized, had chosen to give me everything she built. That was when Logan finally lost control. "This is fraud," he screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "Criminal fraud. She was manipulated, coerced, mentally compromised. He spun toward me, his face contorted with hatred and disbelief. You did something to her. There is no other explanation. I shrank back in my chair, overwhelmed by the violence of his reaction. Logan, I swear to you, I said, my voice barely steady. I had no contact with your mother. I did not even know she was ill. Liar. He slammed his palm down on Daniel's desk, sending papers sliding across the polished surface. No one gives away everything they built to someone who abandoned their family, he shouted. To someone who could not even be bothered to call when she was dying. She did not abandon anyone, I said quietly, surprising myself by finding a small reserve of strength. Our marriage ended, but that does not mean— It means exactly that, Logan interrupted, his voice rising toward a shriek. You walked away from us. You took your pathetic settlement and vanished into your pathetic little life while she built an empire. And now you expect me to believe she just handed it all to you. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with professional authority. Mr. Ramirez, Logan, he said firmly, I understand this is overwhelming, but I must insist that you regain control. These are your mother's clearly stated wishes, executed with full legal authority. Logan turned on him, his eyes blazing. I want every document examined, he demanded. I want psychiatric evaluations. I want a full accounting of every single interaction this man had with my mother over the last 5 years. There were no such interactions, Daniel replied calmly. Mrs. Ramirez made that explicitly clear when she explained her decision. Explained her decision? Logan let out a bitter, humorless laugh. So she explained why she decided to betray her only son and give everything to the man who ruined her first marriage? She left a personal message for your father, Daniel said. The word father hit Logan like a physical blow. For a brief moment, the fury in his face flickered, replaced by something raw and devastating. Pain. Deep, unfiltered pain that tightened my chest. Then the anger came roaring back. He is not my father, Logan snarled. My father would have been there when she needed him. My father would have supported her dreams instead of trying to hold her back. He turned on me again, his face twisted with years of accumulated resentment. You are nothing but a failed man who could not handle being married to someone better than you. Each word cut deep, not because they were entirely false, but because they carried enough truth to wound. I had felt inadequate during those final years. I had struggled in her world. I had been the one who could not keep up with what she was becoming. Maybe you are right, I said quietly. Maybe I was not the husband she deserved. But I never asked for this. I never expected it. Expected? Logan shouted. You orchestrated this. Somehow, someway, you got to her when she was vulnerable, when she was scared, when she was— That is enough, Daniel interrupted sharply, his professional patience finally cracking. Mrs. Ramirez was neither vulnerable nor compromised when she made these decisions. She was, in fact, more focused and determined than I had ever seen her. Then why? Logan demanded, his voice breaking despite himself. Why would she do this to me? I did everything she wanted. I worked for her company. I lived the life she planned for me. I became the son she could be proud of. The pain in his voice cut through my own shock. Despite everything he had said, despite the years of hostility and public humiliation, I saw him clearly in that moment. A man who had spent his entire adult life trying to earn his mother's approval, only to discover she had given her final validation to someone else. She left a message explaining her reasons, Daniel said gently. Would you like me to read it? Logan's hands were shaking now, his entire body taut with rage and grief. A message? He said hoarsely. She could not explain it to my face, but she left a message for him. The message addresses both of you, Daniel replied quietly. It was meant to be shared after the will was read, Daniel said quietly. I found my voice, though it came out rough and unsteady. Maybe we should hear what she wanted to say. Logan's eyes snapped to mine, blazing with raw hatred. You do not get to decide anything, he said sharply. You have no right to any of this. Yet even as the words left his mouth, I could see something else beneath the anger. A desperate need. a need to understand why the foundation of his entire life had just collapsed. Daniel was already reaching for another envelope. It was separate from the legal documents, thick and cream-colored, with personal message written across the front in Melissa's unmistakable handwriting. He raised one hand, commanding silence with the authority of someone used to controlling volatile rooms. "That is enough," he said firmly. "Both of you." The tension froze in place. "Before this goes any further, I have something that will explain everything," he continued. He opened the envelope carefully and removed several sheets of stationery. "Melissa knew this moment would be painful," Daniel said. "She instructed me to read this message after the will was announced." Logan sank back into his chair, his fury momentarily overtaken by a fragile, aching curiosity. I remained motionless, afraid to hope, yet desperate for anything that could make sense of what was happening. Daniel cleared his throat and began reading. "My dearest Carl, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are probably sitting in Daniel's office wondering whether the entire world has lost its mind. I can see your face right now, that expression you used to get whenever I rearranged the living room furniture without warning. Confused, polite, trying very hard not to complain. Despite everything, a faint smile tugged at my lips. She had captured me perfectly. Hearing her words aloud made it feel, impossibly, as though she were still in the room. I know this inheritance feels like a mistake. I know you are probably convinced you do not deserve this money or this responsibility. But Carl, you are wrong. You deserve every dollar, and I need you to understand why." Daniel paused briefly, then continued. "I never stopped loving you. Not during our worst fights. Not during the divorce. Not during the 15 years of stubborn silence that followed. I was angry with you for not understanding my ambition, but I was angrier with myself for choosing ambition over our marriage." The words struck me like physical blows. My chest tightened as tears surfaced, sudden and uncontrollable. "You tried to save us, Carl. You begged me to slow down, to find balance, to remember what mattered. I was too proud and too afraid to listen. I felt something inside me crack open. Years of guilt and quiet regret condensed into a moment of impossible release." Then Daniel continued reading, and I saw Logan's head jerk up. "Logan, my brilliant, beautiful son, I know you are furious right now. I know you probably believe your father manipulated me. But sweetheart, you are not ready for this inheritance. Not yet." Logan's face drained of color, then flushed red again, emotion cycling faster than he could control. "You have lived your adult life beneath the shelter of my success. You enjoyed the rewards without ever having to carry the weight of responsibility. You have never had to build something from nothing. Never had to make decisions where failure meant real loss. And worse, you spent 15 years hating a good man for crimes he never committed." "That is not true," Logan whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Daniel continued. "Your father taught me about character, about integrity, about a kind of strength that does not need to humiliate others to feel powerful. I forgot those lessons when I chose money over marriage and business over love. But I never forgot the man who taught them to me." I was crying openly now. I did not try to hide it. Melissa's words were rebuilding something inside me that I had believed was gone forever. A sense of worth, of meaning, of quiet dignity. "Logan, I have given you enough to live comfortably while you discover who you are without unlimited wealth shaping your identity. Learn to build something yourself. Learn to value people more than profit. And learn, in time, to forgive your father for the crime of being human and imperfect." Logan let out a broken sound, something between a sob and a growl. Whether it came from rage or grief, I could not tell. Daniel went on. "Carl, you are inheriting more than money. You are inheriting the chance to do what I failed to do. Use wealth as a tool for good, not as a weapon for proving superiority. I trust you because you never wanted this, because you will never use it to hurt others the way I sometimes did." The letter continued for several more paragraphs, addressing practical matters and offering hopes for both our futures. But the heart of it was unmistakable. Melissa had chosen love over entitlement, character over expectation, wisdom over ego. When Daniel finished reading, the room fell into a profound, suffocating silence. Tears streaked down my face as I sat there, overwhelmed by the knowledge that Melissa had loved me until her final days. Logan stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his certainty in ruins. Finally, Daniel folded the letter with care and slid it back into its envelope. "She asked me to give this to you," he said quietly, extending it toward me. "Carl, the original is yours to keep." My hands shook as I accepted the letter, holding what amounted to the final conversation I would ever have with the woman who had shaped my life in ways that were both beautiful and deeply painful. The weight of Melissa's words settled over the office like fine dust after a sudden explosion. For several long minutes, no one spoke. I pressed the letter against my chest. It was not the money that overwhelmed me in that moment. It was the restoration of something I had lost years ago. My worth in her eyes, and even more importantly, my worth in my own. Logan broke the silence first. "This is not over," he said quietly. The fury was gone from his voice, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "I can contest this. Mental incapacity, undue influence, fraud. There are ways to challenge a will." I looked at him then, really looked at him, for the first time since we had walked into Daniel's office together. I saw a man who had spent his entire life believing the world owed him certainty and reward. A man who had never learned that love could not be inherited or demanded, only earned. "You could try," I said gently. "But your mother was right, Logan. You are not ready for this responsibility." "And you are," he laughed, bitter and hollow. "You are a nobody, Dad. A retired power plant worker. No business background, no connections, no idea what it takes to run a company worth hundreds of millions." For a fleeting moment, the old version of me wanted to agree with him, the man who had spent 22 years feeling inadequate. But Melissa's words echoed in my mind. "You deserve every penny." "Maybe you are right," I said, standing slowly. "Maybe I do not know how to run a corporate empire, but I do know something your mother valued more than expertise." "And what is that?" he snapped. "I know the difference between serving others and serving myself." Logan's face twisted with one last surge of anger. "This is insane," he said. "She was old. She was sick. She was not thinking clearly." Daniel's voice cut in, firm and final. "Your mother was 62 years old and in excellent mental health when she signed these documents," he said. "She underwent extensive psychological evaluations specifically to prevent the very challenges you are suggesting." "Then why?" Logan's voice cracked, suddenly sounding far younger than his years. "Why would she do this to me?" A surge of unexpected compassion rose in my chest. Despite everything, he was still my son. "She did not do this to you," I said quietly. "She did it for you. She gave you the chance to find out who you are without living under the shadow of unlimited wealth." "I do not want that chance," he shouted. The words burst out of him, fueled by 15 years of entitlement and expectation. "I want what is rightfully mine." "What is rightfully yours," I said calmly, "is $500,000 and a house worth nearly $1 million. That is more than most people see in a lifetime. What you believed you were entitled to was never truly yours to begin with." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the realization settling in. The man he had humiliated earlier that day was no longer seeking his approval or his understanding. "You think you have won?" he said, grabbing his coat with shaking hands. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I replied, and I felt the truth of it down to my bones. "I think it makes me responsible." He paused at the office door, looking smaller than he had when he arrived. "This is not finished." "Yes, it is," I said softly. "It ended the moment your mother made her choice. What happens next is up to you." He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that echoed through the room. Daniel began organizing the papers on his desk. the rustle of documents pulling us back into practical reality. There will be accounts to transfer, legal filings to complete, board meetings to schedule, he said. The company's executive team is strong. They will help you transition into your role. I nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of everything that had happened. Daniel, I said, may I ask you something? Of course. Did she really love me, even after everything that went wrong between us? He smiled then, the first genuine smile I had seen from him all day. Carl, he said, she spoke about you every time we met. Not about the divorce, not about the conflicts, about the man who taught her that success without character is just an expensive failure. I walked out of that office a different man than the one who had entered. The afternoon sunlight felt warmer, the air felt cleaner. I had work ahead of me, responsibilities I never sought, a company to understand and guide. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt worthy of the task. I realized then that justice is not about revenge or public vindication. It is about recognition, the recognition that character matters more than credentials, that patience outlasts entitlement, and that real love never truly disappears. Melissa had seen all of that, and in her final act, she had given me the chance to prove her right.